Hey, what is up guys? So we are going to be having a discussion video on tech cards. So first off, let's go ahead and go over what a tech card is. Then let's talk about some of the good tech cards that you can actually run in your deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! So first off, a tech card is basically an analysis of what the metagame is, and some of these cards can really hurt some of the meta. And it also allows your deck to have access to something that you normally wouldn't have access to because you're playing maybe an archetype or a specific deck playstyle, and you don't have access to get out of some bad situations, or sometimes just get a huge advantage simply by just running one or two of these tech cards. Now, a bunch of these tech cards have actually been used in top YCS decks. It's just, some really good decks that a lot of players really don't see as good cards, but some players really do like, and sometimes allows you to have access to not only getting some type of advantage, but simply sometimes you can win the duel by that one tech card that you actually win. So let's go ahead and go over some of the great tech choices that you can main deck or even side deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! So first off, we're going to kick it off with one of my favorite tech cards, Neo-Spacian Grand Mole. I love this card so much. It gets rid of all XYZs and all synchros, unless there's something that, negates the attack, then obviously you wouldn't have access to Neo-Spacian Grand Mole. But this card is absolutely fantastic, being able to just get rid of any XYZ or synchro, but then it comes back so then you can get rid of him later. I mean, obviously he only has 900 attack, but that's irrelevant unless his effect is obviously negated. But he's just a fantastic card. What I love about this card is it can force out your opponent to activate an effect Baylor, and then at that point, sometimes they still can't respond to it next turn because they're like, well, I didn't draw the card that I was hoping to draw, I still can't get over Neo-Spacian Grand Mole, what do I do? And then at that point, they're going to be at a very bad spot. They've lost their effect Baylor, and they're going to now lose their XYZ or Synchro still. Now, the thing with Neo-Spacian Grand Mole, I love playing him in Agents. One deck that was a really bad matchup when you were playing Agents was something like Evil Swarm, and Neo-Spacian Grand Mole was able to get rid of Ophion, and it was also able to get rid of, back in the day when E-Heroes were still a thing in the TCG because Stratos is still banned, unfortunately, he was able to get rid of, Absolute Zero. He's able to get rid of things like the Shining, and also, obviously Shining wouldn't get its effect because, it's going back to the extra deck. So he's just a fantastic little card. Now I would say if you are, looking to try some tech cards for your deck, or you just have an extra slot and you're like, what card should I put in? Try Neo-Spacian Grand Mole. He's a fantastic card. He's a very easy card to use as well. Next up, Kaiser Coliseum. Now, a lot of players have been playing this in Boojins. It's also been popular a long time ago, back in the day when Gladiator Beasts were still a thing. If you like to play a more of an anti-meta-ish deck, if you like to play a slower deck that only revolves around having one monster at a time, this is a fantastic card. So basically, if there's one or more monsters on the field of the controller of this card, his or opponent cannot place a monster on the field that would exceed the number of monsters that are in the card's controller. They made that text really confusing. They've changed the wording on the Soham. So basically, what it comes down to is, if I control Kaiser Coliseum and I have one monster, you cannot summon more than one monster, meaning if I only have one Gladiator Beast or I only have one Boojin monster, you cannot XYZ or Synchro summon. So that's basically what it comes down to. That's the main effect. Also, you can't have more than one monster, but what it comes down to is it prevents any XYZs and any Synchros from going on. And if you're playing a deck like Gladiator Beasts or Boojins, this is a fantastic card because you would realize most of the time you only have one monster on the field, and it does not really hurt you, and it prevents your opponent from even playing. And sometimes versus a deck like the Heretic or Heretic Dragons, they have very limited options on what they can do. Obviously, Sue is a thing, but, they have very limited options other than Sue, what they can actually do. I know that they technically have 3 of those convocations now. Next up, we have Liberty at Last. Now, this was a very popular side deck back in the day when Agents were good. There were a lot of top YCS players that side decked I think they only side deck 1 or 2 of them, but this card is fantastic. So this card's effect is when a monster you control is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, target 2 face-up monsters on the field, shuffle those targets into the deck. So that can mean your own monsters if you wish to, but majority of the time it's going to be your opponent's monsters. It was really popular against Agents simply because it got rid of Gotchi. Gotchi was a kind of a strong thing, not necessarily for his attack, obviously, because it only had 900 with both of the attachments, but it was super strong because it had 2200 defense points, and it was something that was really difficult to deal with, turn 1 basically. And sometimes you would lose because, boosting every monster up by that amount of attack, it just got really problematic, and it was a hard thing to deal with sometimes. And also, the ability to, finally OTK Agents, because when they had Gotchi, it was kind of difficult to OTK them. But Liberty at Last, fantastic card because it got rid of, the Gotchi, and then obviously the material would still go to the graveyard, but the Venus went back into the deck. So that means the player would maybe draw Venus later on, and Venus was a bad card. After you use the effect of the Shine Balls, Venus was basically just a, Hyperion target. And, it wouldn't put, Venus in the graveyard, so it definitely hurt the Agent player. Next up, Void Trap Hole. Now, I honestly thought this card would have saw a little bit more play, but when your opponent special summons a monster or monsters with 2,000 or more attack, negate the effects of one of those monsters with 2,000 or more attack, and if you do, destroy it. So this card, obviously, it's very similar to Bottomless Trap Hole, although you cannot stop normal summons with it, so that's just one downside that Void Trap Hole has. But also, it has to, negate the monster's effect. So if it, you can't exactly Void Trap Hole something like Azneyeswhitedragon. Not that that card's too meta, but the card is not bad nonetheless. Next up, Enemy Controller. This is probably one of the hottest tech cards. A few formats ago, it's still a fantastic card. Even Jeff Jones, I believe, was playing this in his Mermail deck, and he really loved this card. This card is fantastic because you basically have two options for effects. So you can either take your opponent's monster by tributing your monster and sending it to the graveyard, and then basically from there you can just OTK them. Or, what you can also do is you can change the battle position of one monster your opponent controls. So that might allow you to block an attack. That'll allow you to, move a monster to attack position, or even move it from defense position to attack position. That way you can, deal some damage. Maybe they have a Treeborn Frog in, defense position. You're going to deal a huge amount of damage to it. So I think that this card definitely has a utility. It is a quick play. So maybe you summon a monster, they activate Bottomless Trap Hole, you chain Enemy Controller, you now tribute your monster, so now it does not get banished, and then you get to take their monster till the end of the turn. And what's awesome with Enemy Controller, you can do whatever you want with their monster. It's not limited like Mind Control. You can XYZ with it, you can synchro with it, you can tribute it. There's no limits to what you can do with their monster with Enemy Controller. Next up, Swallow Flip. This is a card tech from Cesar Gonzalez, one of my favorite players, and he loves Swallow Flip. So this card says, negate the activation of effect monster's effect that activates when a monster is special summoned, including itself, and destroy it. So tons of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, when this card is summoned, you activate this effect. This would negate it, and it has no cost at all. There's no pay life points, there's no discarding a card. This card is still a good little card over here. Next up, this one I would say is more popular. This is Phoenix Wing Windblast. There are a lot of decks that run cards that you just don't need. Something like the Heraldic Rulers. You don't really need the vanilla monsters in your hand. So hey, Phoenix Wing Windblast or Regeki Break. These are just basically the same thing. Windblast has a little bit more utility technically because it can reset stuff that your opponent might not want to draw. Like for example, you can make them top deck something, I don't know, like Vandy's Emptiness, and then you go ahead and do all your special summoning, and then they're going to have that card, and it's going to be a dead card. So essentially you can set up to where your opponent will have one dead card next turn, or they lose their draw phase essentially is what it comes down to. Next up, Creature Swap. So this card is fantastic in combination with Breaker. I love Breaker and Creature Swap because Breaker initially he gets to get rid of one spell or trap card, but then he's only got 1600 attack, and that's not too strong. In combination with Creature Swap, you get to get rid of their back row, and like if they have a good monster, let's say they have Stardust Dragon, well, let's say they have Scrap Dragon or something like that, you get to get rid of one back row, then you get to take their monster, and obviously Breaker, he's not a threat, he's lost his counter, he's only 1600 attack, and you're going to attack over it. So Creature Swap is a fantastic card. Also, when you're using floater monster, a floater monster would be something like Mystical Tomato, Pyramid Turtle, Giant Rat, anything that says when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to your graveyard, you get to special summon. I believe Ember's Blade, or does that have to be sent from your side of the field? Some cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! They have to be sent from your side of the field. Other cards, it doesn't matter, they get their effects in the graveyard. So what's awesome with something like Ember's Blade, with Creature Swap, if I summon an Ember's Blade and I activate Creature Swap and I take your monster, I then use your monster to kill my Ember's Blade, I get my Ember's Blade's effect. So if you're playing a deck that likes to float monsters, zombies would be an excellent example with Pyramid Turtle and Mystic Tomato. You can not only take your opponent's monster, but then you still get another monster out of it, so it's really cool. Next up, Book of Moon. I would say this card, it originally was a tech card. Now it's kind of considered a meta card, although there are tons of decks that don't play the card. This card was at 3 for ever, and then everyone started main decking doubles and triples, and then it was like, okay, let's go ahead and put that card to 1. That's kind of what happens with a lot of these tech cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Next up, we have Bull Blader. It's very similar to DeeDee Warrior Lady, although it does not vanish, but Bull Blader says, when an attack is declared involving this card and an opponent's monster, you can activate this effect. During this battle involving this monster, neither player takes any battle damage. Also, destroy the opponent's monster after damage calculation. So basically, it's got some little utility just to get rid of one monster that maybe you can't attack over, or it's just a problematic monster and it's got too much attack or something. It's just like a small card. I still think DeeDee Warrior Lady is a really good card. I believe at one point DeeDee Warrior Lady was at 1, but basically what it does is it allows you to put a monster on board in order for your opponent to well, it's supposed to basically make it so whenever your opponent is getting something out, they're going to have to lose one of their cards. But, you know, obviously a good player should be able to play around it. But sometimes, you know, you just don't have the options to get around it. You have to sacrifice one of your good monsters to get rid of DeeDee Warrior Lady. Next up, Penguin Soldier. I love this card. I used to attack one of these in my E-Hero deck before I played the Bubble Mans, because, you know, obviously it didn't work out too well with Bubble Man. But, because sometimes you'd have, you know, multiple Penguin Soldiers. Usually it was like I'd run one of it, but this card was fantastic. It's a flip effect. You can target 2 monsters on the field, return those targets to their hand. So what I love with this card is you can actually return Penguin Soldier, but not when it is attacked, when it's face down and then it's flipping face up, because then it would still get destroyed. But let's say they have one monster, you know, face down, and you have this face down. You can flip it, target Penguin Soldier and their monster, return them both. One cool thing that you can do would be something like, let's talk about Cyber Dragon plus Grand Mole, because this is a really cool combo too. So basically with Cyber Dragon, I could special summon Cyber Dragon and set Penguin Soldier, and then I can attack over their monster, and then you know, with Cyber Dragon, and then when they go for their play, you know, whether they can get over Cyber Dragon or not, because it does have 2100 attack, so it's kind of a good, you know, beater. And the thing is, if they go for like a set play, you can go ahead and flip the Penguin Soldier, return their monster, and return Penguin Soldier, and then you still have Cyber Dragon on board. And then every turn, you'd be basically doing the same thing. You'd have to force them to attack into your Penguin Soldier, and at that point, you know, that's good for you, because then you can still return their monster, and then you still have them have a blank board, and you can just Cyber Dragon again. So it's pretty good. Going back to the whole, I was going to talk about Grand Mole and Cyber Dragon. This is a really easy combo. So I special summon Cyber Dragon, and then I normal summon Neospatial Grand Mole. I send whatever they have back, and then I still have Cyber Dragon. So I get rid of their monster, then I can attack directly with Cyber Dragon, as long as, of course, they don't have another monster. So that's just a good utility. You can see how some of these cards can combo with other cards in, you know, other decks. Next up, DeeDee Crow. This card was okay in Blackwings. A lot of Blackwing players were main decking one of them. Basically, what it allowed you to do, back when zombies were a thing, Blackwings were popular for I don't know how long, but DeeDee Crow was a really good card because it was a wing beast that worked with Icarus attack. It was really good chainable. When players would target other things in graveyard, you know, you obviously just activate it, and, you know, it's another dark for dark arm, so it worked pretty well. Next up, Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. This card stops, you know, chaos decks. It stops any decks that like to basically, you know, obviously just banish things, you know, from the graveyard. So what I love with Kaiku, though, it doesn't have any negative effect from your side. Plus, it also has a bonus utility when you can target up to 2 monsters. When it inflicts battle damage, you get to target up to 2 monsters in your opponent's graveyard, and you get to banish those targets. And your opponent cannot banish cards from either player's graveyard. It was basically used against Lightsworn, but it can definitely be used against other decks. Some people liked it against Spellbook, so they couldn't. I believe Spellbook of Fate. It's just I think it's something that he uses against Spellbooks. Oh no, never mind. It's not Fate. Fate, I believe, banishes like just on the field. But the thing was High Priestess of Prophecy. That's the card, I believe. It's just a good card too. I mean, obviously now they actually play High Priestess of Prophecy. Before it was all about like Jaugen. That was the card they went for. Next up, Doom Caliber Knight. This card is kind of a double-edged sword, so it's got kind of a negative effect too, and whatever you do, never, ever, for whatever reason, summon 2 Doom Caliber Knights. Because 2 Doom Caliber Knights will negate each other. So let's say, for example, you have a Doom Caliber Knight on the field. Let's say you have two of them. Let me have him grab another one. There we go. So let's say you have... Oh, I just wanted to put this card here because I was going to talk about this card because it was really cool back in the day, but apparently if your opponent controls 4 or more cards than you do, you can special summon Mirror Wall, but its effect obviously needs to be like fixed. It's just like a little glitch. But anyways, let's say you happen to have 2 Doom Caliber Knights. Let's say I summon Breaker the Magical Warrior. Breaker the Magical Warrior's effect tries to activate. Doom Caliber Knight has to be chained. This is a non-optional effect. During either player's turn when a monster effect is activated, tribute this card, face-up card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that monster. So, what will happen? Breaker's effect activates, then Doom Caliber Knight's effect will activate, then the other Doom Caliber Knight has to activate. So, Doom Caliber Knight will then negate Doom Caliber Knight, and then these would go to the graveyard. Breaker then does get its effect. So never, for whatever reason, summon 2 of these. This card is a lot of good players, have topped. Love this card. I remember Jarrell Winston, I believe, in his Chaos Dragon deck, he played Doom Caliber Knight. But just watch out for that. Just make sure you're on top of your game. Don't summon more than 1 Doom Caliber Knight. And when it's on the field, you can't activate effects either. So keep that in mind. Well, you can activate them, but what will happen is you'll not only lose your monster, but you'll also lose your Doom Caliber Knight. So keep that in mind as well. Next up, we got Lightning Vortex. I loved this card. This card it's a pretty good card. Basically, well, for the longest time in Yu-Gi-Oh, Dark Hole was banned, and there were some zombie players that like this card. You discarded Mizuki, you discarded Plague Spreader. There are decks where, discarding, Fabled, hey, you could work in that too. There are decks where, discarding is not that bad. Now, it will not get its effect. Well, I mean, Lightning Vortex will get its effect, but Dark World Monsters will not get its effect because this is a cost. Dark World Monsters do not get their effect as cost, but the card is just a good card nonetheless. Clears the board, pretty self-explanatory. Next up, Prohibition. Now, for the longest time, I love this card in the side deck. Now, in the main deck, it comes down to the point where you have to know what key card your opponent is going to be playing. You have to basically know what deck your opponent is playing. If they're playing something like E-Heroes, you go ahead and call Miracle Fusion. And that will hurt. I mean, heck, you call Stratos, but or you can call Neos Alias, and that would kind of suck for them too. But basically, what it comes down to is if they don't have, I think you can set the card. I'm not positive on that. If someone knows, hey, let me know. But that means if you call Neos Alias, that would hurt them a lot because then they couldn't do anything. But I mean, basically, what it came down to is you call Miracle Fusion for E-Heroes, and that was they had to get rid of this, otherwise they weren't doing anything. Next up, we have Legendary Jujutsu Master. This card was good against Gladiator Beast. Really old tech card, but it's got 1800 defense points. So you set the card when this defense position monster. They've changed the wording on this card so many times. But anyway, if this defense position card battles a monster at the end of damage set, place that monster on the top of the deck. So basically, you'd set it, they'd attack into you. Then it would have 1800 defense, so if it survived, you were at a huge advantage because you'd have your monster, and then they would lose their monster, and it would go to the top deck, so they would basically lose their draw phase, so it's really good in that aspect. Next up, Mystical Ref Panel. I mean, it was kind of used against the Dragon Ruler deck when they would go for their draw power. There's other decks, the Sylvans are coming out when they're going for their draw power, but Ref Panel is really good because it allows you to basically get rid of, it negates your opponent's MSC, then you get to MSC their card, or it can stop a duality, and then you get the effect of duality. It's only good against certain decks, and there's some decks that just never have something that targets one player, so keep that in mind as well. Some of these tech cards are only good against certain decks, like Mystical Ref Panel is probably the best example, but a lot of these you can use against, a lot of decks, but there might not be a deck that you're playing against that will synchro XYZ also. This card will be bad, but Granbull is pretty much, this card's always amazing. Next up, Smashing Ground, basically just to get rid of just one thing. It's a pretty self-explanatory card. Next up, one of my favorite cards, Malevolent Catastrophe. Now that Heavy Storm has banned, this card is, relevant. I love this card so much because, especially in a deck where you're playing cards like Reckless Greed, Upstart Goblin, where you're going for that whole aspect of drawing a bunch of cards as quickly as possible. So what this will allow you to do is you could just go for Malevolent Catastrophe, and then you can chain everything, whether it's your Abyss Sphere, your cards basically have chainables. And then you're basically setting a bunch of cards to make your opponent think that, you wouldn't set all these cards for nothing. So what you would do is you would have Catastrophe set, and then you'd have all these cards that you can chain, whether it be Jar of Greed or whatever, and then your opponent would basically lose a bunch of their cards. So you set a bunch of cards to make it so your opponent feels comfortable setting a bunch of their cards, so they don't worry about a Black Rose or a Heavy's banned, or just anything that would just destroy all the back row. And basically what you're doing, what's called a false commit to the field. Basically you're giving them the illusion that you're putting a bunch of resources into the game, and you're really not. You're basically playing the mind games of Yu-Gi-Oh, which is awesome. Next up, we have Mind Drain, pretty self-explanatory. There's not really anything that negates spells in the game right now that's really good. Well, there's Shein, but something that every deck can use. There's not very many counter trap cards that negate spell cards in the game without some huge cost. So when an opponent activates a spell card, they can discard one spell card to negate this effect, otherwise negate the activation of that spell card, and if you do, destroy it. So basically what this card comes down to is you're going to negate your opponent's card, but if they want to go -1, they can stop this card. So think of it that way. So it's plus in that aspect. Next up, we have Soul Taker. I'm going to put this card right next to Raikou because they have kind of a similar effect. They force cards to miss the timing. Cards that would miss the timing would be something like Elemental Shining, Light Pulsar Dragon. Basically, those were the cards this was used against. And this card's fantastic because it gets rid of anything that you would want to get rid of. Your opponent gains 1,000 life points, but that is technically good in one aspect because it forces things to miss the timing. Raikou also basically does the same thing. Raikou is one of my favorite tech cards because not only does it speed up your deck by sending 3 cards, which can be bad for certain decks, not all these tech cards are good for every deck, but you get to get rid of 1 card on the field, and then you get to mill 3 cards, and the milling forces cards to miss timing. So what's awesome with Raikou too is you don't actually have to destroy, you can just send the top 3. That's another aspect of Raikou that's awesome. And what's really cool with Raiko is he gets rid of any problematic card, whether it's a monster card, it's a trap, whatever, face down. It gets rid of any problematic card, and I think he's fantastic in that aspect. Cyberdragon, he's just kind of there as a body. I already talked about how he can combo with something like Neospatial and Gramble. Neospatial and Gramble also kind of works with Photon Thrasher. That's pretty awesome. Next up, False Dyna, pretty self-explanatory. It's just a really good card. And don't worry that some of these cards might prevent you from playing, because the thing is, something like False Dyna will be really good because False Dyna will make it so your opponent can't, well, both players can't special summon, but like, as long as this card is out on the field and your opponent's not doing anything, you might be just good to go. Like, you don't have to worry about anything because, obviously if this card's alive, your opponent might just not have an answer to it. Next up, Banisher of the Radiance, Dimensional Fissure, Macrocosmos. All these cards basically prevent the Graveyard from being there in the game. Unfortunately, these are both at 1, so a macro deck can't really function nearly as well. There's Banisher of the Radiance, which some people liked. The thing is with Banisher is that he does have low attack. That's one downside. Whereas with Defissure, you'd have just Defissure, then you can go for your summon of like stronger monsters or something like that. Banisher, obviously, like I said, that's pretty much his downside. He has 0 defense. Not that that matters too much. You're never really gonna set this card anyways, unless your opponent already has a monster that's way too strong. Next up, Spirit Reaper. This card has a lot of utility. It has a stall utility. It also has the ability to make it so your opponent loses 1 random card out of their hand when you attack. So I think Spirit Reaper is a fantastic card, but obviously against Dark World, you're gonna have a bad time. But Spirit Reaper definitely has a lot of utility in the deck. Plays level 3 that could survive. Sometimes people ran it in the Macro Rabbit back when that was a deck. But Spirit Reaper, it has a lot of utility. Next up, this card, Non-Aggression Error. This card has got an insane effect. It says you can only activate this card during your standby phase. Discard 1 card from your hand. Your opponent cannot normal summon, set, and/or special summon during his next turn. Now, obviously, it has a huge down cost, basically 2 cards. But then again, some decks only summon. For example, let's take a deck like Light Swarm, for example, or a deck like Heretic Rulers. They don't have very many spell and traps, so what it comes down to is your opponent loses their entire turn. Sure, you're going to lose 2 cards because you have to use this card and you have to discard a card. But maybe you're playing something like Fable. Maybe you're playing something like Zombies or something. There's no downside to this card other than you discarding a card. It doesn't make it so you can't special summon or normal summon during your next turn. So you can put up a huge field. Your opponent obviously gets that 1 turn that they have, but it's during their next turn, which if it was like the current turn, that would be amazing. But basically, you're going to be forcing your opponent to commit a bunch of cards to the field because they might know if they don't do anything, you're going to OTK them because you're going to get, not only one of your next turn, but then they're going to lose essentially their entire next turn if they're playing a deck that can only summon monsters, a monster mash or a monster heavy deck where they can't protect themselves with their spell and trap. They're relying basically on playing really aggressively with their monsters or using their monsters to actually prevent themselves from losing, whether it's by some protection effect or something like that. So this card is really good because it forces your opponent to play a really aggressive for that 1 turn that you activate that card, and if they don't have an answer, sometimes you can simply just win the game. Next up, we already talked about Breaker. He's pretty self-explanatory. It just gets rid of a spell and trap. But let's get into my last but favorite card. I love my Body as a Shield. This card was awesome. Like I mentioned before, back in the day when Solemn Judgment was an expensive card and it was at 3, I couldn't afford it. I played my Body Shield. I love this card. There were certain times where this card was faster than it, like a Torrential Tribute, Mirror Force, No Fear. My Body Shield dropped that card, and my opponent would be like, oh my gosh, the card is too fast, I can't do anything. I love this card. It stopped cards like Black Rouge, Judgment Dragon, any Dark Hull's legal now. Dark Hull wasn't legal when I thought this card was the best card of the game. But this card was so awesome. It was basically like, it reminds me of like the Forbidden Lance of the time. Forbidden Lance, I think, is a much better card than this card, but at the time, we didn't have Forbidden Lance, and this card was too good because it was offensive, it was defensive, and it was fast, and I loved it in that aspect. And I didn't have to pay half my life points. Although, technically, this card could be dead at some points because you wouldn't have the 1,500 life points to actually pay for, where Solemn Judgment, you can never dead draw that card. Oh, something totally random that I wanted to mention. If you have 1 life point in Yu-Gi-Oh!, you cannot pay half. You cannot have half a life point in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's pretty much irrelevant, but there was one time in the game where, I don't remember what game it was, but there was some card that kept on forcing me to half my life points, but you can get down to the point where if you can't pay for half, like the card doesn't work in Yu-Gi-Oh! I thought I was just there to mention because, I don't know, it's just random off-topic thing. But anyways, these are a bunch of great cards that you can run in your main deck or in your side deck, and this is basically a discussion on tech cards. Basically, what it comes down to is if you have room in your deck, you're like, you know what, I have 39 cards, I have no idea what to put in my deck. Hey, check out some of these cards. Maybe some of these cards definitely can help your deck. Maybe they can stun your opponent's deck. Like I said, Grand Mal is probably one of the best choices, and it's a really easy card to use. But, you know, and especially in a deck where you don't need your normal summon, something like the Heretic Rulers, you don't really need your normal summon most of the time. So, you know, Grand Mal can come in clutch and get rid of that Ocean, get rid of that key card that you just can't deal with. But these are, you know, a lot of tech cards that I think are good. But if you have any other tech cards that you think are fantastic in this game, or, you know, let me know what your thoughts are on some of these tech cards. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day. Sorry this video was so long, but, you know, there's so many good tech cards to actually discuss about. But thanks for watching. Azneyes signing out.